All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cooking with Kole. It's a beautiful Saturday out, so thank you for joining us. I have an attendee on my side who's a little young, so you might hear him a little bit here in the intro. But we have the libraries open, and we still have Chromebooks for checkout. So please come visit the library. And if you know anyone who's struggling with access to the internet, we do have Chromebooks if you have a library card, as well as mobile hotspots. So without further ado, take it away, Kole.
Well, happy Saturday, everyone. Welcome back. Like Ruth said, the weather this week has just been phenomenal. And from all the snow and the cold that we had over this past winter, whenever spring starts to pop around the corner, I personally always crave Mediterranean food. And so today's menu is sort of a nod to that. So what we are making today is something called salsa macha, and it is more of a Spanish kind of salsa with a little bit of Eastern influence because there are some peanuts and also sesame seeds involved in this particular salsa. There's a couple different ways to make it, whether you want it thicker and creamier or something a little bit more runny, which is my personal preference. But I'm going to show you how to construct and orient that. And then we're going to pair that with a kind of yogurt and bread and basically turn it into a Eastern dip, which I think is really fun and exciting. Also, what we were making to accompany the salsa macha is something called salmon crudo. And crudo is the Italian and Spanish word for raw, and we're not actually eating raw salmon, although you could if you wanted to. Traditionally, it's prepared using the same method essentially as ceviche, where you have some form of acidity, whether it's lemon or lime, and you let basically little slices of salmon cook within the acidity of that juice. But instead, I decided just to bypass that because finding sushi grade salmon is a little bit tricky. And instead, we're using smoked salmon, which I think is a really easy, safe, delicious alternative that makes this taste equally as good. So that's what we're making today, and it should be a fun class. I don't know that I've done a traditional salsa before. We've done pico, but I don't think we've done like a really good salsa with different kinds of chilies. So I'm excited. Some housekeeping things we have going on in the kitchen today is my oven is preheated to 350 degrees. I also have a small skillet here that's just on basically the lowest setting. We're going to use that to toast our sesame seeds and peanuts a little bit. And then also I have a medium pot here that has some lightly simmering water. I have it on medium low, and it's just been hanging out there for about 15 minutes or so. So I think without further ado, the last thing is if you have questions, feel free to type those into the comments per usual, and I will try to answer those in real time as Ruth relays those questions to me. So the thing that I think we'll start with first off is the one that takes the longest, and technically that is the salsa macha. And so I'm using 4 different kinds of chilies, but the recipe calls for 3, and I just have one in here, a different one, and oddly enough, I am blanking on the name, so I'm going to mention that in just a second. But we have a kind of chili called Amorita Chili, and they're really tiny, and it blends in with my shirt, so I'm actually going to show you on this camera here. So they're relatively tiny. They're about, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inches long. Here's my pinky. And the flavor profile of these guys is really almost like caramely and smoky. It is like a very intense, like almost a chipotle flavor, but not as strong, if that makes any sense. So we're using those. We're also using my personal favorite kind of chili. This is a Guajillo Chili, and they're known for their like classic redness. And if you ever go to sort of the western side, like Arizona and New Mexico areas, they have these things called chili ristras, and they're these long strands. I believe ristra just is Spanish for string. And it's these long, like almost garland things of chilies, and they're usually made from these Guajillo. And then we're also using chili arbol. And arbol chilies are known for their really pointy, very thin color, and they're also really bright. They're almost like orange. And what's interesting about these, even though they're so small, they pack a ton of heat. And so you don't necessarily want to use a ton of them if you're not someone who is like a big fan of spicy foods. I would say like I'm a big fan of spicy. I like hot. I want to feel the heat on my tongue and like let it linger. And so I'm using 2 today. If you don't want as spicy, you don't even have to use these at all. But a trick to mitigate some of the heat that is in the arbol chilies is to make sure that you remove the seeds. And so I did that for most of these now, but I'm gonna show you the main way that I like to do this. So I remove the seeds from this one, but oftentimes what I use is just a pair of kitchen shears. And I'll scoot this over just a little bit more so you guys can see more clearly. So what I like to do is find the top where the stem has been located, and then I just snip that off about 1/4 of an inch or so. And it's up to you how you want to do this. Oftentimes, if you just take and squeeze the pointy, sort of firm outer edges here, you can get out a large chunk of the seeds. But sometimes what happens is because the skin of the chili is so thin, you might crack it into a bunch of different pieces. So instead, what I do is just with my shears here, just make a little slit down one side and then give it a crunch there. And a lot of times you can get out a lot of those seeds. And the seeds are where, especially in this arbol chili, that's where a lot of the heat is. And the heat, flavor profile wise, is referred to as capsaicin. And so the capsaicin is the heat aspect in here. And so if we get rid of a chunk of these seeds, in theory, it won't be as hot. So it's another way that you can control the heat with this. So the other one that I've done this Guajillo chili here, but I haven't done this one. So similar to like really any chili or any pepper, like a bell pepper, there is that large sort of, I don't know the word, but like there's a concentrated amount of seeds right in the tip close to where the stem is here. And so similar to what we just did with this arbol chili, we're going to cut off a little bit more just because it's physically bigger, about a 1/2 inch from the top here. And you can just see the seeds fall out of this. So there's a lot in here. Now, Guajillo chilies, these aren't really hot at all. What I like is whenever you go to blend them up, they give off such a beautiful red color. And the smell that comes with it, it's very unique. I don't exactly know how to describe it to you, but it smells like incredible. It smells like very, very authentic, very rich smelling. So there's not really any heat to this. It's more of just a smokiness. And the most smoky one are these Amorita chilies, the tinier ones here. And I just remembered this one. It's an ancho chili. And this, you don't necessarily need to use it, but I like the flavor. I find one just adds like a really good wholesomeness to the dish. But optional, you don't have to have it at all. So I have 10 Morita, 2 Guajillo, and 2 arbol chilies. And if you want, 1 ancho. And where I find all of these is I like to go to different kinds of markets pretty regularly. I love Asian markets for finding very like niche specific ingredients. And you might most likely be able to find these chilies there. But if you can find a Spanish or Mexican market, you're gonna find like incredible, high quality, really good chilies along with a bunch of other stuff and like very affordable, high quality produce. And that's sort of my cheat to saving money is rather than getting produce at your conventional grocers, which is totally fine, sort of smaller markets have a really interesting selection of fruits and veggies that are oftentimes like a pretty great quality. So I would encourage you fairly recently to go check out some of those markets and see if you can find these chilies for yourself. So I'm going to discard all of these seeds here. My trash can underway. And what I'm going to do is just gather these and I'm going to submerge them into my pot of just lightly simmering water. And so for about 5 minutes or so, these are going to rehydrate. And one thing you'll notice is that if you don't cut the tops out of all of them, they're going to take quite a bit longer to rehydrate. So one of the ways that they help get thicker and that more full is the water has to go on the inside. So if you don't cut them, one, you're going to have a lot more seeds in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you're using a lot of those chili arbol, those little ones, that's going to be a lot of hot and a lot of different like subtle heat from that capsaicin, because again, all of the capsaicin, the heat is in the seeds. So there might be small amounts of that in the other chilies, but because we remove them, we're mainly using them for flavor and not necessarily for the capsaicin or the heat. So as those are hydrating, I find that it takes about, like 5 to 10 minutes, nothing too crazy. What we want to do next is to begin to toast our sesame seeds. And so I'm using, there's actually a bunch of different variety of sesame seeds, but if you look here, I have a variation of black and white, and I find the flavor and the color is really great. And so add any oil or anything in there. And those are going to toast over the course of, I would say, I don't know, 3 to 7 minutes or so. And we're also going to toast some peanuts, but before we do so, I want to chop them up into more appropriate bite-sized pieces, or smaller than bite-size. I'm finding that this is on a little bit too hot. I'm going to lower the temp. The one thing I will say is if you're going to go toast the sesame, just like toasting any spice, the oils that are trapped inside of the sesame become really aromatic. So you're going to smell it. It's going to have a slight sesame smell. And also you're going to notice it start to toast. It's not from necessarily the black sesame seeds, but the white ones. They're going to go from a white to more of like a peanutty color, I suppose. So I like doing those first because they take a little bit longer. But one thing you want to do is fairly regularly, just move them around on this dry skillet so that they don't get overly hot in just one area. You want to be a bit more mindful. So with these, it's just regular old peanuts. These are roasted and unsalted. So technically, you don't necessarily need to toast the peanuts again, but I like to just for a brief second. But I'm going to chop these so that they are relatively smaller in size. Because again, this is a salsa. You don't want like a giant chunk of peanut in there. You want it to be a little bit more fine than that. If you have a food processor, feel free to do that too, but I would say that it's probably more appropriate to pulse it rather than just to like press it and turn it on. I believe we've talked about this before in the past, but this is a good case in point, is you always want to think about texture when it comes to whatever it is that you're making. So for me, I don't want a giant like peanut chunk just resting on a chip or some bread because we're going to turn this into a dip. So instead, I want it to be relatively thin. Now later, especially with the salmon crudo, we're going to be mincing different kinds of herbs. We're using dill, mint, and chives. And so each of those flavors are a little bit different. So you have to think, what do you want to accentuate? Mint is a really strong flavor, so I would want it probably in a finer mince. Chives is really mild, but if you have a long strand of chive, it's going to be kind of stringy. So you want those to be also really fine. But dill is already really thin, so you don't have to chop that up too much. And so thinking about how you want to prepare your veggies, your condiments, the sides that you're making, think about texture and flavor and how to do those flavors justice while balancing out the dish that you're making. I think that's just a fun concept to think about in general. Should check my sesame seeds. They're toasting pretty good. My peppers are looking great. They probably only need a few more minutes. Let's turn up the heat here. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to add the peanuts to, if I can do this without spilling, chopped peanuts are a little bit like crazy to work with. So let's see if we can do this. Doing good so far. It is crazy messy though. Okay, I'm gonna take the rest of this and dump it in the trash. These tiny bits just get everywhere. I'm actually going to rinse off my hands quick. I will say if you have a peanut allergy specifically, and you don't want to use peanuts, an alternative that I find, the flavors aren't exact, but if you use sunflower seeds that are shelled, that also is a fairly good alternative to peanuts because there's a creaminess there as well. Cashews could be fun, but I think sunflower seeds would be a great alternative. So essentially all we're trying to do is to heat up some of the oils in the sesame seeds and the peanuts to bring out that toastiness to make this a really rich, fantastic salsa. So the next step that we can work on while those things are getting good is to mince up some garlic. I'm using 3 garlic cloves. And this doesn't need to be necessarily perfect, which is great for salsas. It doesn't need to be, precisely uniform because we're going to ultimately blend this up in a blender. And you could use a food processor too, but we're just looking to give a little bit of color to some garlic here. That's fairly good. So don't focus on getting overly small. For me, I like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I have a tendency to go all out, but with something like salsa that doesn't need to be necessarily perfect, you can be really patient and just sort of have fun with it. So I'm gonna call this good. I'm gonna cut myself off. I'm gonna check these sesame seeds and the peanuts. They smell fantastic. They smell really, really good. I'll let them hang out just a little while longer. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And so let's go ahead and see, I think I have a fork here to see if these peppers are hydrated enough. So they'll increase in size and they'll also kind of get not as thick as like a traditional, like a fresh pepper, like straight from the vine. Just slightly thinner than that. So we're looking for the inside flesh, especially since we cut off the tips, to get a little bit soft and malleable where it's not so physically rigid and hard. And I think we're good here. I'm fairly happy with this. The ones that take a little bit longer are those Amorita chilies, because when they dry and they're so stinking small, they get almost like it's kind of like a date in a way, but because they're so dense, they take a slightly longer time. So I would say the time frame is anywhere from, for those, like 7 minutes, 7 to 10. But because the other chilies are so much thinner, you don't want to take them overly too long in the water because then a lot of those flavors are going to leach out into the water, and we don't want to miss out on that flavor. So I think what I'll do is actually just call this good. I'll cut the heat, remove that from your burner. And then one thing that we want to do is to save our water because we're going to reserve that to help add, essentially monitor the consistency of our salsa. So we're adding some oil to this, but also we're going to be adding the water to sort of balance out how thick or thin you want to make this salsa. But before I do that, I can already feel it. My spidey senses are tingling that the peanuts and the sesame seeds are done. So I'm going to remove that from the heat and then just transfer these to a plate. I'm going to cool off for just a little bit. And I can see some toasty, sort of caramely colors in those sesame seeds. It's harder to detect in a peanut. I suppose since it's already been roasted, that'd be very difficult to do. So those will hang out. I'm going to put this back on that burner. Again, it's at medium low. And what I'll do, in here I have, it's a little bit of a mixture of avocado oil and olive oil. So I believe it's a 4th cup of each. And I'm going to use a little bit of this to add some toastiness to the garlic that we just minced. So probably just a tablespoon or so, nothing crazy. Yum. And then let's transfer this garlic over there. An immediate sizzle. That is what we're looking for. Go ahead and give it a stir. Now, potentially this will happen quick, so I need to keep an eye on it. We just want it to get a little bit crispy, not overly crispy, because there is a fine point where garlic turns bitter. And so if it's overly brown, we want to avoid that. So we want to have it to still be a little bit white. And actually what I think I'll do is, because it's sizzling so much, I'll leave it on the burner, but I'm actually going to cut the heat. So that'll be fine. I'm going to strain and reserve the water and the peppers that we have. So I have here just a fine mesh strainer, and you can use a colander, like a traditional like pasta colander. That's totally fine. But I find with this, it's a little bit, you can catch sometimes if like the little flakes of the arbol chilies come off. I want to preserve some of that flavor and that heat, because again, I like heat. And so a fine mesh strainer is going to work just as fine for me. I'm going to set this in my sink and gently pour it over. And you'll notice the Guajillo chilies, those larger ones, really sort of take the cake. Like they double in size relatively quickly. So my garlic has been browned just slightly, and I'm going to quickly add that to a blender here. I want it to stop cooking. All right, that's going in. Make sure that your blender material, what I mean by that is like this physical container here is rated for like a decent amount of heat. Heat safety. That's sort of just like a regular old blender. You might just want to check the manual to make sure that it can withstand heat. All right, so the garlic and the oil, or some of that oil is in here. I'm going to pour in my 4th cup of avocado oil and 4th cup of olive oil. So both of those are in here. That's going in. I have a spatula. And then also, eventually what will go in here are the peppers. So I'll set this off to the side. Right. So this is what they look like. I'll show you on the other camera. You can see that they got pretty darn big. Like this Guajillo, that's almost double in size, and it's so big. And then these Amorita chilies, they're very flexible. You can see that they're very fleshy, and the inside has hydrated a pretty good amount. And the smell in the room is just fantastic. So I'm going to place these in there. And what I find about the mesh strainer is it catches excess seeds. Can you guys see that okay? So those seeds, they're not necessarily a terrible thing, but again, if you're trying to monitor the spiciness, the capsaicin, then that's something that you want to catch and get rid of. So those are in there. This next step is optional. It's totally up to you. But I find that it adds a really pretty intense creaminess. So what you can do is add a half of your toasted sesame seeds and peanut mixture to this, but it will make it really, really thick. And so if you're not someone who likes overly thick salsas, maybe this is a step that you mitigate a little bit more. For me, I'm probably going to do about a 1/4 or so, and because I don't want it overly thick. All right, I'm good with that, because the crunchy bits, we're going to add this to it, the rest of this after the fact, after we blend it up. Okay, So also to this, what we're going to add is a half teaspoon of sugar, another teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of salt. It's a lot of salt. You can mitigate that if you want. A half teaspoon of Mexican oregano, which is different than regular oregano. And I'll show you right here. I don't know if you can see, but it has like thicker granules and there's even some like flowers in there. So the flavor of Mexican oregano is there, it's sort of like this spicy floral version of traditional like Italian oregano. And the flavor is really, really great. I got just a small box of this at the Mexican market that I went to for $1.50, like crazy affordable. Such really good ingredients. So again, I would check it out. And I believe also in here, just to double check, that there is a teaspoon of smoked paprika. So all of that is going in here as well. Set these off to the side. All right. And so what we're going to do is use some of our reserved liquid. I start with about a cup. You don't want to go too hot, too heavy, because you can always add more. You can't take it out. So I would say maybe start with a 1/2 to 3/4 cup. This is a 1 cup measure. I'm just going to ladle it in. All right, I'm only going to do about 1/2 of that. Now I apologize for the noise. It is a blender. And you're going to start off on low and gradually increase the speed because the first little chunks need to be broken up and incorporated. And that's going to indicate to you how thick or thin it initially is, and you'll add in the rest of your liquid until you get a consistency that you're looking for. I'm going to add this on. All right, again, sorry for the noise. All right, so it's mostly blended. I find that if you do it in stages, it's easier. So the first stage, I usually like 3. When I first blend it up, it breaks up a decent chunk of all of those peppers and some of the peanuts and stuff. And then the next phase, I'm gonna take the speed up a little bit more. All right, so phase 3 is kind of the trickier one. So I'll show you on this camera, you're gonna see some steam, so hopefully it doesn't get you too much. But you see how thick that is? The consistency, it's also very smoky because there's all those chilies in there. It's pretty darn thick, right? You know, this is kind of like, I don't know. It kind of has the consistency of peanut butter a little bit, maybe a bit thinner. Let me just try flavor-wise. Wow. Oh, I don't even know how to describe this. It's so rich and creamy and smoky. Like, this really is such a simple sauce recipe. This is way too thick for me. I want it infinitely thinner. So this is the rest of that 1 cup. And I even think I'm gonna add more to it. So on the recipe, I put out 1.5 cups of liquid, but really just adjust that to size. Again, you can always add more, you can't take it out. So I think 1/2 cup at a time is the best way to do it. I can already tell I want more. All right, one more go. Let's see. That's pretty good. I honestly want it even thinner. So what will happen, especially if you store this in the fridge, it's gonna firm up just a little bit, nothing too crazy. Okay, I think this will be good. Thanks for your patience, guys. One more time. Okay, so here we go. Oh. The smell really is like, if you make a salsa traditionally this way in your home, it is phenomenal. And the color is just completely beautiful. So if you look at this opposite camera here, and look how much salsa you get. So one thing I should say too, when you get chilies, especially at like a Spanish or a Mexican grocer, they are so affordable. I got like a half-pound bag of all of those different kinds of chilies and peppers. Total, for all of them, it cost me $6. That's nothing. Cool, that's mostly good. My one little piece of advice would be that when you go to blend this up, that as soon as you're done, give it a rinse, because the chilies and the peppers have such deep pigment in them that if you let this sit too long in your container, especially if it's sort of like, because mine is a kind of safe plastic, if you have glass, you're fine. But similar to like if you put like spaghetti sauce in Tupperware or it gets that sort of red thing, that will happen here. So I'm gonna rinse this off quickly so I don't stain this. All right, cool. So essentially that's it for salsa matcha. This next step is optional, but I think it's a lot of fun. Before I get to that though, I'll show you guys on the camera here. Do you see? It's very warm. The consistency here, this is what I'm looking for personally. I like this. So again, once it hangs out in the fridge, it'll firm up just a little bit, not too much. But this is so smooth and fantastic that if you wanted to, you could stop here and it would be totally fine. But if you want a little bit of a crunch to it, what you can do is add in, I'm not going to do all of this because I don't actually like too much. Again, you can always add more. You can't take it out. Mix this up in your salsa matcha. Actually, I do think I'm going to do all of it. And it yields so much. I would say that this is probably three. And voila. That is your salsa matcha. The smell is just incredible. It's really, really yummy. All right, so that's going to hang out here. I will set this off over here. So the next thing that we need to begin to prepare is our salmon crudo. And again, crudo is Italian and Spanish for the word raw. We're not using raw fish. But there's lots of different ways that you can prepare this. The classic one is that you use some sort of cucumber and then you make a dressing to cover the cucumber and the salmon itself. So you'll need another bowl. I'm going to be using this one. And you'll also need about a tablespoon or so of capers. So I had a fork somewhere. Oh, the fork is in there. So first, what you'll do, I'm a big fan of capers. I love the briny and saltiness of them. It's very fresh to me. I use them constantly. So what we're gonna do is just give these a really simple, easy chop. And ideally what we're going for is a paste of sorts. So because they're round, they'll like to shift and move around on you, and that's normal and fine. It takes a few passes to break up a chunk of those halves, but eventually, really in no time, you start to get to almost a paste. And again, if you've taken class with me before, it's very important that you have your pointer finger, regardless of what hand you're using, to hug the outside of the blade, and that's going to help you get really nice, precise cuts. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with this, but we are going to turn it into a paste in just a moment. And we're going to form a paste with one shallot, and this is just like a smaller, regular sized shallot. What I love about shallots is I shouldn't say never, but I don't regularly use a whole onion. I just use a little chunk of it, and then I'm left with half of an onion. And what do you do with it? You put it in the fridge. It usually like sprouts over like the course of 2 days, or it loses a chunk of its flavor and its integrity. So instead, I default to shallots a lot of the time, and then the flavor is just delicious too. So this is a smaller shallot. And what I'm going to do is just begin to make fairly thin cuts. And one thing too, whenever you're working with onions, if you go with your knife, the blade, if you just go straight down and you hear like a kind of, I don't know if you guys can hear this, like that tap sound, you know that you're applying too much pressure downward. And instead, if you press down with, I would say, the same amount of zeal, but then guide your blade slightly forward as you're applying pressure downward, you're going to get much more accurate, precise cuts, and you're not going to hear that clunk on the cutting board. And if you do that too often, what that actually can do is begin to dull your blade, and we want to avoid that. And you can see how thin, these are. So just that little shift is an important one. So I'm just cutting it the opposite way. And similar to what we did with the capers, I'm going to try to get these as fine as possible. And don't worry, this one doesn't need to be perfect, but I love practicing with knife skills because I think it's a really fun skill to have, and it elevates whatever it is you're making. You can tell. Okay, so we're going to combine these minced capers and shallots together. And this next step isn't necessarily crucial. You don't need to do this by any means, but I'm going to add in some flaky salt. You could also use coarse salt, ideally uniodized, and you're going to add this to it. And what happens is the rigidity of the salt granules. You can't just use table salt. They're way too small. And if you took class with me last time, we learned that table salt is the saltiest salt there is. And the more coarse it is, the least salty salt it is, which is sort of a mind bend. But we're going to press using the side of our blade against the salt and the shallots because we're trying to make a little bit of a paste. And because of the sharpness of the blade, it's really good at working in and getting into those cell membranes and just thinning it out just a bit. And it won't be like a perfect paste, but it is much more mushy, which is what we're looking for. Okay. So now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and add this to our bowl. This is a very messy knife. And I'm actually going to give it a rinse. It's a bit too crazy for me. So to this, we're going to add a handful of things. So we're making a dressing right now, essentially. We'll add in, I believe it's 2 teaspoons. Yes, 2 teaspoons of caper juice. I love the salty brininess. Capers love to, if you like the measuring device, they love to go in because they're so tiny into this little slot here. So my advice to you is take the lip of the measuring utensil against the edge of your glass, and you won't have any of those sneaky capers trying to get in. All right, I'm gonna put this back in the fridge. Also, what we need to put in here is some tamari. And tamari is like my preferred go-to version of soy sauce. It is a gluten-free version. I'm not gluten-free or have celiac or anything, but traditionally soy sauce is made with soy and wheat. And the long, very like professional version of soy sauce, if you ever want to experience it, is called shoyu, S-H-O-Y-U. And it's delicious. It's really like incredible quality. If you're someone who loves like soy sauce and Asian cuisine, treat yourself to some shoyu. But if you really want to go out and enjoy like the full umami magic that is the soy sauce world, tamari is what you got to do. So it's just the same soy sauce without the wheat, and the flavor is incredible. And it's aged for something, I forget the amount of time, but in traditional methods, and it's really, really yummy. So we did 2 teaspoons of caper juice, 2 teaspoons of tamari. And we're also going to add in the zest of a lemon, or I guess the zest of half a lemon. But I really love the citrusy notes in it. So if you use a little bit more, that works too. If you want to skip this step, you totally can. But the flavor and the aromatics that are in lemon zest, I find it's really delicious because it adds almost more lemony flavor without the acidity and the bite of the juice itself. And when you add both, I mean, if you're going to go out and buy a lemon, why not utilize the whole lemon, you know? We mentioned this last week too. I think we did. But if you use your zester and you get too close to the pith, which is that white stuff underneath the coloring of the lemon, that is a little bit bitter. So if you can, try your best to avoid that. And so I'm almost done here. Usually when it comes to zesting or using a microplane, which is this tool here on citrus fruits, there's 2 methods. I like this one where you just take the zester and then just go over the outer portion of the fruit. Some people like to physically hold it and then go like this. I've had too many instances doing this way where like I'll nick my finger on it, and I don't want like to zest my finger. So I think this is the easiest way, but whatever you got to do gets the job done. All right. Oh my gosh, the perfume in here is just incredible. Yum. All right. Half a lemon. And I'm just going to squeeze this over my hands because if there's any seeds, I'll catch them in there. And then the juice just slips through the creases of my finger. The one thing I will say is if you go to squeeze a zested lemon, it is such a curious feeling. Like it feels, I don't know, it's more slippery, I would say. It's harder to work with. Okay, I've obliterated this lemon. Throw it away and rinse off your hands. All right, so to this, we're also going to be adding in some really fresh ingredients. We're going to be adding in mint, chives, and dill. And the recipe that was sent along is more of a suggestion. What's cool about, I guess, either of or any of these menu items is you can customize them to the flavor profile that you personally really like. So I like dill. I'm not like in love. It's a few sprigs. This is a very large piece. You'll take these fluffy bits here. It kind of looks like a Dr. Seuss plant. I feel like this is something you would see in a kid's book. And honestly, I think this is enough dill for me. I'm gonna call that good. And I like to roll it up similar to how you chiffonade basil. You sort of roll it into a cigar shape. And then again, it's flavor-wise, these things are really thin already, right? So a very simple, uncomplicated chop is gonna be just fine. And dill's kind of messy. So many little strands there. Oof, but it is aromatic, that is for certain. To this, I'm also going to add in chive. If you don't have chive and you don't want to use it, just use the greens of a green onion. That's a really similar one, but my advice would be to you to like really do a good job at making those cuts very fine, because sometimes like a thick chunk of that isn't going to be as good. And same thing as before, as you're going down, just glide your blade partially forward. I'm good with that. Okay. And the next one, which is my personal favorite, is mint. And the kind of mint, there's so many different kinds of mint. The mint family is such an interesting thing to look up. There's spearmint, wintergreen, peppermint, catmint, just like so many different varieties of mint. But I'm using a spearmint, which is most mint you find at the grocery store. If you use peppermint in this, the flavor is going to be way loud, and it's going to have that cooling effect of peppermint, like a toothpaste thing. So if you're using mint, make sure it's not peppermint. But I love mint. It's also great in teas. A spearmint lemonade is really fun. So if you wanted to, you can make a lemonade out of this, or even like a cucumber mint lemonade. I've been craving lemonades lately. Maybe I'll do a lemonade class for the next one. But I'm just rolling up these mint leaves, giving these a decent chop. No one wants a giant piece of mint. So that is a loud flavor, even for spearmint. Okay. That goes in. And then next, we're just sort of eyeballing some olive oil into here. The recipe, what did I write down? It said 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and that's probably accurate. But you want to think about how runny or how thick you want this to be. Because essentially you could turn this into a chimichurri, but we really want it to be more of a dressing, you know? I'm going to use another spatula here. So about 2 tablespoons or so. Wow, the perfume is just incredible. I'm gonna add a little bit more. I'm good with that. All right, so let me look this through because it's a long ingredients list. I don't want to miss anything. No, we're good. Cool. So give this a mix. And if you want to, you can let it hang out in the fridge. I think it's probably fine on the counter. But essentially what we're trying to do here is have all of these flavors and aromatics infuse into the lemon juice and the oil and some of the brininess from the tamari and the caper juice. So we want those to infuse into the oil. And we're going to let that use mostly the oil, some of the herbs that are in here, but we're really just using this as like a dressing and a drizzle to our salmon crudo. So I'm going to get a plate ready because we're going to start to plate our salmon crudo. First things first is we need to begin to very thinly slice some Persian cucumbers, which are also referred to as mini cucumbers. They're very cute. I've given these a wash already and just put them right back in the bag. And for today, I'm just going to use one. Set this back in the fridge. And if you have a mandolin, feel free to use it. You don't have to, but I find that the consistency of size is what really brings out a uniformity and an elegance to this dish. So I have right here a mandolin, and it takes a few trial runs to figure out how thin or thick you want it. I personally like it on basically the thinnest setting possible. I think it is just very visually pretty. And then the slices just fall underneath. And if you're noticing, I am just slowly rotating the cucumber around. And it's not necessarily a crucial step, but if you just keep going in one direction, you'll find that the slices, when they cut, a lot of the times they're weighted more in one aspect of the cucumber or whatever it is you're using the mandolin for than the other, and you can mitigate that by just rotating, your cucumber or whatever veggie you're doing. And that's plenty for this, because I'm just going to make a single plate. There's a little piece of cucumber stuck in there. Be careful, mandolin blades are notoriously sharp. Set that off to the side. And now the fun part begins. I'm going to start with the center of my plate. Choose your favorite, thinnest, most beautiful Persian cucumbers right in the center. And then from there, the knack is you want to partially overlap them so that it takes up a lot of the surface area of the plate. So you don't want to see any plate. And what you're left with is like a beautiful star-like shape. It takes a little bit of time, but I think the result that you get after the fact is absolutely worth the time and what little labor this was. So not a crucial step. What you can do too is if you make the slices a bit thicker, you can do the same thing. You don't have to like essentially make a carpet of cucumber, but you can use the cucumber essentially as chips, which is what they're traditionally used for. The method that I'm basically using today is it's more of a salad, I suppose, where you're just going to eat it with a fork. But both work. If you do thicker slices, the vehicle of the cucumber is basically a chip for your salmon. Otherwise, this thinner version is more of a salad. So this is where texture and uniformity really come into play. So there's lots of ways that you can spin just a single recipe, which is so cool and fun to think about. So I've used this tool a lot of times. This is just like a little silicone mold, and you don't necessarily need to have this, but I find that the uniformity and the shape of it is really cool and professional looking. So I'm just going to set this on top, and then I'm going to grab some of my smoked salmon. And actually, you know what? Before I go to assembly, I think what I want to do is start to cook my lavash, which is that Lebanese bread. So you can get lavash at like Trader Joe's. This was $2 for a lot of it. But we're going to make some chips for our salsa macha. So I have here, they come in little like rectangle slices like this. I'm just going to use one. And with my knife, what I like to do personally is just just eyeball the center and apply some pressure with your knife, and you can cut it into squares and then hit that on the diagonal and use the length of your blade to get like the accurate cut so that it's a straight line. I'll do that for the other one. So I'm just lining up the corners and then just applying some pressure, and voila. That is crazy simple. And then I have here just a parchment paper lined tray. Go ahead and set down your lavash triangles. And then take just a drizzle of olive oil. Any oil works, but olive oil, especially for this, is so incredibly Mediterranean and flavorful. Why not? I'm really just doing like a small little dab of olive oil. And then using your finger or a spoon or a spatula, whatever works, go ahead and spread that around on top of the lavash. And wherever there's oil, that's where it's going to get relatively crispy, which is a texture I find that's really delicious and yummy. And also olive oil, like a good olive oil, the flavor there is fantastic. Yeah. So to this, it couldn't be simpler. I'm just going to be sprinkling on some Zatar seasoning. Zatar is also kind of an Eastern, I wouldn't say Mediterranean, maybe, kind of seasoning where there's marjoram, lemon, and tarragon. You can go really crazy with Zatar, but the second you smell it, you know exactly like the kind of cuisine. A lot of times like falafel is in there. So it looks like it's toasted sesame, thyme, marjoram, coriander, oregano, and lemon peel, so lemon zest. The smell is so yummy. These are gonna go in the preheated 350-degree oven for about 5 to 7 minutes or so. It's just until it gets a bit toasty. So I don't forget, set my timer. All right, so now I have just some simple slices of smoked salmon. And this is where the fun part begins. I guess the whole thing's fun, but this is really like plating this is such a good time. So I'm gonna take my knife, and what I like to do is try to get slices that are about an inch wide. You can go a little bit more, but if they're too wide, it's kind of unruly and unmanageable to work with. And what I'll do is I like to give them just these little slices here, a bit of a twist, and then just fold them around each other so you get kind of these curious looking weighted shapes, so that when it sits down, if you look at this camera, it kind of protrudes partially upward a little bit. So I'll try to get this. You guys see this okay? I might move the salsa macha.
Yeah.
What's that visual? There we go. Okay. So this is unnecessary to go like this all out, but I mean, what fun taking just a simple ingredient like smoked salmon, give it a twist, and like to fold it up so you can see that on the base of this, it's really weighted, and then up here, it just sort of sticks up, which is what I'm going for. And I'm just going around the perimeter of my mold. And you don't necessarily have to use a mold. Really, you could just most likely eyeball it, but it's a good time. And usually for this, I use about 2, sometimes 3 slices of smoked salmon. And what's great about smoked salmon is it's already cut really thin, you know, like you don't got to do any more prep work. And if you were to use something like a sushi grade salmon, that's a bit trickier to work with. You might be able to have the person that you're getting it from cut it for you beforehand, but then you would have to make sure that you let it sit in your acidity. So either lemon or lime juice. For this, I'd probably recommend lemon. In the fridge for 3 to 4 hours minimum. And sometimes you don't got 3 to 4 hours. So smoked salmon was today's ingredient. All right, it looks like I'm gonna need that last slice. So I'm just going around the perimeter, still making about an inch or so cuts. And then this last bit couldn't be simpler. So what we'll do next is we'll take some of the dressing that we have infusing with all of those fantastic herbs and the lemon zest, and you're gonna coat that on top. Try to sneak in one more piece. It's a little bit big. Oh, it could work. You could even do little spirals. I think that would be pretty. Okay, I'm gonna rinse off my hands. All right, so take your dressing, give it a mix, and you can make this as, herb forward as you want it to. I mainly want the flavors from the herbs, and I want to use the oil. Some of those herbs are inevitably going to get in there, but I'm looking for mainly the liquidy part. So using a spoon, go ahead and drizzle that on top. Wow, there really needs to be smell-o-vision. Like this is, I feel like you're robbed of a whole chunk of this experience. All right, a little bit more. Cool. And this last step couldn't be easier. Let's see. This is an unneeded step, but I'm using a kupi mayo, which is a kind of Japanese mayo that uses, I believe it's just eggs, and the flavor, like, not like I'm a mayo connoisseur, but like if you're looking for a fun ingredient, like kupi mayo in a bottle like this is what you want to do. So I'm just going to do little dabs. Oh, there's the timer for the lavash. We'll get it in a second. Little dabs of this mayo. And what's nice about it is it cuts the acidity just a bit and that brininess. And then again, optional step, you don't have to do it because I break this plastic container. Sprouts. And this is also such a springy thing. Just take some sprouts, put it on top. This is a lot of sprouts. Sprouts are also great in salads. Okay, I'm good with that. And the last step is a pinch of flaky salt. And then the real trick is mindfully lifting up the mold. So I like to grab 2 of the outer edges and just sort of swirl side to side. And then what you're left with, you can see, oh, I messed up the plate just a little bit. But
Wow,
isn't
that's
that so fun?
beautiful. Yeah.
Salmon crudo. So if you made, again, the cucumber slices bigger, it would be, you could sort of use it as a chip, but I'm gonna eat this after we end the class as a salad, just with a fork. Now, the last thing that we'll do is plate. Oh, I need to get my lavash out of the oven. All right, I'm just going to do a little bit of dill and mint for this last bit. We'll be done here in like 3 minutes. Time got away from me a bit. It's just so fun talking to you guys about cooking and techniques and flavor. All right, give these a chop. And also, this is going to be very pretty too. So you'll need a spoon and some yogurt. Make sure it's plain. Flavored yogurt is probably not the way to go. The labna, which is basically just a word for yogurt. It's just technically Greek yogurt. You want to take a spoon. Do it here. And spoon some just regular plain yogurt on a plate. And use the back of it to swirl it around. That's enough for me. And then to this, what you'll do, this is a lot of salsa matcha. This in itself is like perfectly ready for like tortilla chips, like it's that flavorful. So yogurt is a little bit astringent, it's a little bit acidic. And then we're going to use the salsa matcha. Should probably use a spoon for this and not a fork. Actually, I'm going to do that. And just swirl it around. Little mindful spirals. And what's so fun is, again, this is such a smoky, like decadent flavor. I really think you guys, if you want, I mean, it costs like next to nothing to make, just to experiment with it. So we have astringent from the yogurt, spicy from the salsa matcha, and then honey, we have sweet. And herby, mint and dill. And you dip it in there. Voila. So there you have a simple sort of fun dip that honestly could be like almost a breakfast food. You could have, instead of like traditional toast, like this is such an easy go-to. And then since you've already have this on hand, you can let it hang out in the fridge. You also got your yogurt also in the fridge. All you got to do is really just put this bread into the toaster, drizzle some olive oil, and sprinkle on some Zatar seasoning that you can get at Trader Joe's. And you have like a fun, like Spanish breakfast. And maybe for lunch, you go more Mediterranean, almost Italian, and do salmon crudo. And you get lots of veggies, an incredible amount of flavor, and something that takes a little bit of time making. Now you have on reserve for the rest of the week. So yeah, I hope you guys like class. Did we have any questions, Ruth, before you wrap up?
We mostly have had compliments all
Okay.
long. Yeah. So I think most people really think this is like a fun, festive summer dish. Some are wondering if you were to serve it for a late afternoon, would you pair it with a white wine or?
Yeah, I would do white. There is, oh, I'm gonna mispronounce it. One that I'm obsessed with lately. It's one from Porto Verde, aromatic. It is sort of a, I think it would work really, really well with this. So yes, in general, white, probably on the drier side.
Okay, good. And then the other was, what's the difference between sprouts and microgreens? We talked about microgreens in class recently, and they were wondering if sprouts are a type of microgreen.
I believe so, yes. So I think all microgreens are sprouts, but not all sprouts are microgreens. And I think basically the definer is like how thick it is. A lot of times when you go to like Vietnamese places, you'll see like mung bean sprouts, which are sort of the thicker ones. These, I believe, are alfalfa sprouts. Sometimes you'll see broccoli sprouts, which are slightly thicker. And you get a lot, like this giant container costs $2. But what's fantastic, just a fun fact about sprouts, because I don't want to ruin the class that I'm thinking about for like the summertime, but sprouts are like chock full of enzymes and digestive qualities, also lots of fiber. So if you want help with like digestion and regularity, sprinkle these in like a salad or really on top of anything, a sandwich. And the flavor is good and they cost next to nothing, and you can let them hang out in the fridge for about 5 days to a week.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kole. Yes. Oh, so one of the class members would like to say they tried the caco y pepe recipe. That salt and pepper pasta is how I think about it. I've also tried it and it was amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, if anyone else has tried any of Kole's recipes, feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah, and that kind of concludes today's class. I'm trying to think if we have anything. We have some events coming up at the library. We still have Tai Chi outside, outdoor story time if you have any children that are looking for events. And we do have the Tour de Alexandria coming up on April 9th, where we ride our bikes to every branch. So please feel free to join us for any of those events. All right. Well, thanks for your time, Kole. I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.